Welcome to the Midnight Vigil, the channel where the stars are always right and there really is a monster hiding underneath your bed. This is the fourth episode of From the Ether, the series where I talk about hauntings, paranormal activity, urban legends, and other spookables that go bump in the night. I'm very excited tonight to discuss the famous Phoenix Lights incident. This is an audio only episode, as is most of what I do on this channel, so feel free to minimize and go about your business. I will discuss the history of the phenomena and I'll try to do my best to give a timeline of the events. I will give my impressions and reckless speculations about it, and of course, I will conclude by discussing its legacy. So, when people refer to the Phoenix Lights, they are referring to a mass UFO sighting that occurred on the night of March 13th, 1997. There were two distinct and different events that comprised the night of the Phoenix Lights incident. The first event was described as being a V-shaped craft, estimated to be a mile wide in diameter. Various witnesses described seeing 5 to 6 lights, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. They were orangish or amber in color, and they formed in a V or wedge shape along the edge of what was believed to be some sort of craft. The craft was so close to the ground that it was visible as it framed the night sky and as it passed over houses. And the lights visible on the craft appeared to shimmer like you would see heat rising off the ground. Witnesses believe that because the lights stayed in a consistent formation, that they are consistent with being a part of a single solid object, one craft, and it's generally believed that the lights were sort of like the underside of whatever the giant V-shaped vehicle was. The lights moved slowly, completely silent, going over Prescott towards Phoenix, and they eventually passed south over Tucson, where they disappeared over the mountain range. The entire event happened shortly after 8:15 and concluded after the lights passed over Tucson and out of sight at 8:45 local time, though there are other timelines that suggest the sightings happened earlier, as early as 5:30 in the afternoon, though perhaps the earliest real sighting that I could find happened about 6:55, which is still way ahead of the 8:15 timeline that seems to be suggested by quote-unquote official sources. Some versions of what happened have the lights being visible as late as 2:30 in the morning as well, but I think most people agree they were long gone by then. The entire event took place almost covering the entire state of Arizona and was witnessed by thousands and thousands of individuals who were nurses, police officers, lawyers, truck drivers, moms and dads, even flight crews and the tower crew at the local airport, which incidentally the craft, flew over into its airspace. These people essentially comprise all walks of life, and they all reported to seeing the same type of phenomena. In an interesting side note, an unidentified crewman from Luke Air Force Base, that's the one that's local to the Phoenix area, alleged that the Air Force scrambled 2 jets to scout out the craft from the first incident, and they made visual contact with the craft, but it did not appear on radar. This person apparently spoke with Peter Davenport of the UFO Reporting Center, which is located in Seattle, and he called Peter apparently at 3 a.m. in the morning and gave him an extremely detailed encounter, saying how it, quote, scared the hell out of him. The second event comprised a set of 9 lights or so that seemed to hover above Phoenix later that night, around 10 p.m. local time. The United States Air Force took credit for this incident, explaining that a routine training exercise occurred that night in which several Slow descending, long burning flares were dropped in the location surrounding Luke Air Force Base. The lights from these flares would have been visible in Phoenix, and these flares would have appeared to hover due to the rising heat, which would create a ballooning effect on their parachutes, which would explain how eyewitnesses seemed to see the lights hovering and going up and down. And the Air Force stated that the lights seemed to wink out because they fell behind the Sierra Estrella, a mountain range southwest of Phoenix. Apologies if I get the pronunciation on that wrong. The Air Force stated that their training exercise departed around 8:15 and returned several hours later. So we're already in the impressions and speculations portion of the video. This is, to me, a seriously disturbing case, but maybe not for the reasons you're thinking. We're going to get back to that and why this case kind of freaks me out. But for the moment, I'm going to recklessly speculate and come to a definitive answer as to what happened on the night of March 13th, 1997. But first, let's go over some interesting details that I didn't include in the official narrative of the whole drama. Okay, so initially there was very little media attention about the case. Verley Nanaman, a 911 operator who was working for the Phoenix Police Department on the night in question, went on the record as stating that she believed the reason why the papers only had a small article describing the event in which they stated that the lights were witnessed by only a handful of people is because the cover-up was already in full swing. Look, obviously thousands of people saw this, so this is completely fictional. I don't even know why you would attempt to pass off such an obvious lie as the truth. Frances Barwood, a Phoenix City Councilwoman and vice mayor, was approached by a reporter in May of 1997 and was asked to give comment on the mass sightings that happened in March. The reporter said that the mayor's office said, quote, "We don't have UFOs in Phoenix," which was obviously odd because no one had stated that they were UFOs. People just wanted to know what had happened. Barwood broached the topic at a city council meeting where the issue was dismissed without further discussion. One of the assistant city managers came up to Barwood after the meeting and told her that she shouldn't have brought that up in chambers because the mayor's office didn't want to discuss the issue any further. The media, of course, went out of their way to demonize Frances Barwood, and they completely assassinated her character in the press. She would spend the next several months performing her own investigation about what happened that night, and she spoke to over 700 witnesses. Witnesses no one in the government thought it was a good idea to talk to, witnesses the government had no interest in speaking to, and only one person told a different account of what happened, a young man who said that the phenomena were airplanes. In a totally unrelated incident, the media published that one person's account, furthering the cover-up. Shortly after the lights, Arizona Governor Symington held a frankly embarrassing press conference where he announced to the world that he had discovered who was behind the Phoenix lights, and he brought out one of his aides who was dressed as a cartoonish space alien. This is huge, and it rivals the J. Allen Hynek swamp gas disaster as one of the more despicable dismissals of UFO sightings in recent memory. What's really bittersweet about this whole incident is that Symington would go on, years later when out of office, to walk back his disgusting press conference, saying that he had actually seen the real Phoenix lights, he had seen the craft, and he did believe there was something otherworldly about the whole thing. You are a complete and utter coward, Symington. Okay? You had an opportunity to use your platform to tell the truth. You had an opportunity to not dismiss thousands of eyewitnesses. You had an opportunity in the national press to lend some credence to what was going on, and you totally blew it. And the fact that it took you years and years after the incident to walk back your claims disgusts me. So, why am I mentioning all of these seemingly unrelated things? Well, it's easy, everyone. Prepare your tinfoil hats because I'm going to reveal the truth about the Phoenix lights. Prepare yourselves. Here's the truth. It's all a cover-up. Yes, for real this time, this is what I'm really saying. The local government and media are obviously functioning as an apparatus of the government at large. The mayor's office is saying that it isn't UFOs, before anyone has even said that they thought it was a UFO. The city council doesn't want to discuss or launch an investigation. The government doesn't want to talk to at least 700 credible witnesses. They're not even interested in exploring another possibility to this version of truth. And the governor went on to embarrass himself and his state and the national news media in a desperate attempt to cover up the first incident. Because that's what it really is. When you take a look at all of this, the media only covered the second incident, because that was the incident that had been set up by the Air Force to confuse the narrative and allow them to later explain away the whole thing as a routine training exercise. Who in the world drops flares over an airport airspace and over densely populated cities? That is beyond reckless and dangerous. And besides, if this occurrence happens all the time, which was what the Air Force attempted to establish, that they had been dropping flares over that local Air Force base for many, many years in these so-called routine training exercises, then wouldn't people be used to seeing them? Wouldn't it be a common occurrence? Wouldn't it be something that wouldn't stand out and wouldn't freak out so many people, and would be something that could be like easily dismissed because it's already a part of the narrative? It's already something that people are used to seeing. The skeptics came out of the woodworks and pilloried everyone involved, asking questions about the Phoenix Lights. I thought the point of skepticism was to establish the real truth behind an incident, not defame and bully people for challenging the official government question. Since when in this country do we ever accept what our government says at face value? I've read a couple of the skeptical narratives about the Phoenix Lights. One of them that really stood out to me is Brian Dunning's 10-year anniversary piece in his podcast Skeptoid. The Phoenix Lights were flares. Deal with it, Dunning concludes. Yeah, dummies, how dare you question the narrative? How dare morons like us speculate and attempt to learn the truths behind such a massive and strange sighting? How dare we question what our government tells us? The obvious problem with his narrative, and why I believe his conclusion is erroneous, is that he doesn't include any evidence that refutes or would challenge his perception of the events. All he talks about is the second incident, but we're beyond that. I don't have any problem accepting that the Air Force dropped flares after the first incident. No one cares about the second incident. You can't use this as a tool to dismiss the first incident, though. If the Air Force admits they started their training exercise after 8:15 that night, how do you explain the eyewitness accounts from before that time? The V-shaped craft was sighted before 8 o'clock that night. So if the flares weren't dropped until well after 8, then how can you explain, let alone dismiss, the first incident from that night? It's beyond ridiculous. Oh, and by the way, strange lights in the sky were spotted that year before March of 1997. The lights are consistent with the Phoenix Lights. In fact, if we go back nearly a century to early 1900, there are several reports that cover many years of activity in the Phoenix area. There were no convenient flare fabrications or airplanes with lights that can be utilized to dismiss those claims. But I'm sure it was just another mass hallucination or another outbreak of conveniently timed swamp gas, because those are the only two explanations, of course. This is how truth gets buried and suppressed, and that's why this case is so disturbing. It's ingenious when you think about it. It's an incredibly elegant lie manufactured to plausibly allow the government to dismiss the whole thing as a routine training exercise. And the media ran with the flare story, and the discussion about the whole Phoenix Lights case since then has been dominated by people analyzing the flares, breaking down the footage, and debating nonstop about the second incident. Again, let me remind you, the second incident is not important at all. If you believe the flare story, you've been deceived. And you know what? I have to applaud the entire fabrication, When you've been had, when you've been so thoroughly beaten, you just have to stand up, you have to applaud. I really have to give it to the government. They have truly outdone themselves again. It is a work of art. And the other frankly ridiculous explanation for the first incident is that it was a secret government craft or some other nonsense like that. Yes, what an incredible way to keep a secret by flying it over populated cities and through local airspace. I obviously can't say that it was or wasn't, but if this is how the government keeps secrets in this country, then it's a miracle people haven't yet discovered that the moon landing was fake to cover up the existence of Transformers, or that it really was Marilyn Monroe who shot and killed JFK on the grassy knoll. Okay? If the Phoenix Lights were all fake, if it was just some secret government project, believe me, people will discover the other secrets, government, okay? We're coming for you. We're going to discover the truth. In an interesting side note that is kind of relevant, the Heaven's Gate cult committed mass suicide following the Phoenix Lights incident. 39 people died. Believe it or not, the events are linked, as the cult believed that the Hale-Bopp comet, which was why there was so many people outside looking at the sky during the night of the Phoenix Lights, contained an extraterrestrial spacecraft that they could only access by freeing themselves of their mortal flesh, which they did by using phenobarbital. I've honestly thought about doing an episode on the Heaven's Gate cult because it's just such an interesting story, but I completely forgot that they were sort of connected to the Phoenix Lights. So, since I'm obviously crazy, let's recap. The media did the bidding of the government, who were determined to explain away the entire thing with their contrived flare scenario. It's a cover-up, I say. Other people dispute whether there were even flares or whatnot, but I'm very comfortable admitting that the flares are responsible for the second incident and only serve to muddy the waters and confuse the narrative and witness testimony. But the first incident is entirely unexplained. There's no country on Earth capable of manufacturing a craft that is over a mile long in diameter, runs completely silent, and is also invisible to radar. You won't find that technology on this planet, so feel free to draw your own conclusions. I try usually to, like with this series, with all of the spooky series, or with my true crime series, I try to let people draw their own conclusions. I hope you were entertained by me drawing mine. I entertained myself, which is what really matters. I have my own... Obviously, I'm recklessly speculating here. But, I mean, obviously people don't believe what I'm saying. Draw your own conclusions. When we believe what other people say, and we believe other people without doing our own research, that's when the truth gets suppressed, which is exactly what I think happened here. You know, the government says one thing, the media is saying another thing. They're reporting the narrative of the one person they could find that had a different story than anyone else, and they're reporting it. You know, that's disingenuous. That's not the truth. That's not how we discover what's going on behind the scenes in this country. We have to do our own research. We have to look into it ourselves, and we have to draw our own conclusions. And now we're at the conclusion of the video, where I discuss the legacy of the Phoenix Lights. It's undoubtedly one of the most massively cited and documented UFO incidences in history. An estimated 10% of Arizona's population participated in the sighting, and it has fueled passionate debates since then. The go-to source for information on the Phoenix Lights is, at least in my opinion, Dr. Lynn Katai's documentary, The Phoenix Lights, We Are Not Alone. It's well worth a watch. The documentary focuses a little too much on the flares, for my taste, but it's still an excellent source of information and consults many of the credible eyewitnesses of the lights. Link will be in the description. It's on YouTube. It's like 90 minutes long, but it's a really good watch. I don't tell people what to think, so please draw your own conclusions. That's the beauty and mystery of the unknown, and that it is unknown. If you think it's flares, feel free to let me know. If you think it's a cover-up, feel free to let me know. If you agree with me that the moon landing was faked to cover up the Transformer conspiracy, please let me know. And if you too agree that Marilyn Monroe was behind the JFK assassination, it would comfort me to know that I'm not alone in the truth there either. And of course, the usual disclaimer, I have sometimes a limited amount of sources and information to go off of. This case has a very confusing timeline of events, and I feel like a lot of it boils down to he said, she said with regards to what time the flares were dropped and what time the craft was spotted, because the truth is there. I feel like if you take a look at the times, obviously you're going to find out that the flares, in my opinion, were dropped way after the fact that people were seeing something. But I mean, I'm acknowledging right now the timeline on this case is really, really confusing. I've done my best to portray the truth, but of course, if there are any major errors in my video, I will correct them as such. Thanks for watching. If you liked the vid, maybe subscribe, and if you have a Twitter, you can follow me at Midnight Vigil. I will see you guys next time.